good evening, everybody. This is Chuck, aka Malik, and I'm gonna kind of uh, make a different video for you tonight. I've had a couple of people ask me to create a video on uh, just creating a pivot table, setting up a simple dashboard and a macro. So I'm just going to do something very quick here. So let me kind of explain to you my sheet here. I have my sales orders, and this is just some fake data of order dates and the region that the representative's in, the representative's last name, and the item that they sold, and how many they sold, and the cost, and all that stuff. Just a straightforward table right here, nothing fancy. Just really just one formula too, the totals column. And it's not a huge amount of data. I mean, a very small amount actually, just 130 rows. But we have a lot of repetitive stuff. So, like we have a lot of east regions and a lot of central and a lot of west. And, the representative is repetitive. Jones appears multiple times and Morgan appears multiple times. So, this type of data, this much data, wouldn't lend itself very well to a regular chart. Because if we were to create a regular chart out of this thing, it's going to create a bar for every one of these records. So when you have repetitive data, that's where pivot tables come in very handy. So I've created really 4 pivot tables here. One that's total sales, and one that's total number of items sold, and one that's the total that they've sold in the region, and then one that's even a percentage of how much they've sold. Just some really very simple pivot tables. I'm going to show you how to do one if you've never played with them before. And so I'll do this one again. This is just the total sales. So the way you create one, and I'm going to go ahead and just switch to my regular data and show you exactly how this was created. So I'm going to put this in another sheet, and then we'll delete this one. And then I'm going to show you how to put it on a dashboard. So for my regular data, I'm just going to go to Insert, and instead of doing a regular chart, I'm going to do a pivot table. Well, that's going to select all of my data for me. And I'm going to set it up in a new worksheet and click on OK. Now, what you have over here are 4 boxes. Now, pivot tables are actually fairly easy to set up, but you got to know what you want first, because there's hundreds of different ways to drop data in here. Well, what I want my representative to be my filter. So I'm just going to click on representative and drag them down into the filters box. That's going to put that as a filter up here at the top, and I'll show you what that'll do in a little bit. Now what I'd like to know is the items and how much they sold, not the count, but how much money they made off of those items. So the item is going to go in the rows. Now you'll see what shows up here. This is every item that anybody's ever sold, but binder will never appear more than once. Pin set will never appear more than once. It doesn't matter if pin set shows up in my sales order 1,000 times. It's only going to be on the pivot table once. And then I'm going to take the total, and I'm going to drag that down to my value. So what a pivot table is absolutely nothing more than a summary of a huge amount of data. It classifies your data by how you drop them in these boxes. So it's done really nothing but take a look at my sales orders sheet and taking a look at pencil, and wherever it found pencil, it adds up these totals. and that's what it puts right here. So there's that total number of all of the pencils anybody's ever sold. Now the really cool thing with pivot tables is they're constantly adjustable. So in this filter up here, it shows that I'm looking at all representatives, but that's a drop-down list. Now I can say, well, how much did Andrews sell? Well, my numbers are going to change. And see, Andrew, it only showed up with binder and pencil, which meant that Andrews never sold any desks or any pens or any pen sets, because desk, pen, and pen set disappeared. I can take a look at Morgan, and that's how much Morgan is sold. So just by changing the filter, it's going to change my amounts. So let's take this a step further. After we build a pivot table, from there, when you're inside the pivot table, you'll have two new ribbons up at the top. You'll have the Analyze ribbon and the Design ribbon. Well, on the Analyze ribbon, there's a button here that says Pivot Chart. I can click on the pivot chart, and it's going to ask me, well, what type of pivot chart do I want? I'm just going to stick with the column ones, and maybe that's the one I want. So I'll just say, okay. And there's my chart. Now, just like every chart you've ever made, I can go in and I can modify these under the Design tab. I can, add and remove elements. Like if I don't need the legend here, so I can just turn the legend off. I want to keep total and all that stuff. All that's fine. I don't need these buttons here either. So I can turn off those buttons too. On the Analyze tab, there is a button all the way on the right that says Field Buttons. I can hide those. I don't need to see them. Okay. Now, the great thing with this pivot chart is when my data in my pivot table changes, the pivot chart automatically changes to show those new figures. Okay? So I'm just going to change the title here to Total Sales. Okay. And that is the same thing. Let me go ahead and get rid of this one because this is a duplicate tab now that I've already created it. So let me go ahead and just delete that one. And I'll go back to the sheet I just made. I'm going to go ahead and rename that sheet. I'm going to call that Total Sales. Okay. Well, to make your life a little bit easier, instead of having to switch to 4 different tabs to take a look at 4 different charts, why don't we put all these charts in one place? I've created a blank worksheet, and the only thing I did, I went to View and I took the check mark out of grid lines. So it looks like just a sheet of paper. Now I'm going to go to each one of these tabs that have my 4 pivot tables on them, and I'm going to move the pivot tables. So on the Design tab, there is a button that says Move Chart. So I'm just going to click on that. And I'm going to tell it to move it as an object in the dashboard. And that will put it on the dashboard. And I'm just going to stick it over here in the corner. So that's total sales. I'm going to do that for each one of them. Here's percentage of sales. I need to select it, move it to the dashboard. I'm going to resize these just so they'll all fit. Try Try to make them all roughly the same size without making them too squishy. So that's two of them. Let's do region total. I'm going to move that to my dashboard. Make that a little smaller. I'll make them bigger later on whenever we get them all in here. And we got one more. That was region total. We got item counts. Move that to the dashboard. I'll just bring that down here. There we go. So now I've got 4 charts on one sheet. Now, a nifty little thing that you can do is I have to have one chart selected, but there is something called a slicer that can come in really handy. I can click on Insert Slicer. These are for adjusting charts or pivot tables without having to use all the filter drop downs. So I'm going to tell it to show me my representatives. Now what I'm going to see here is every one of my representatives. Now again, remember this chart was selected when I told it to insert the slicer. So if I go here and say click on Andrews, see how that's going to change, and it's going to show me how much Andrews has made in the region. If I click on Jones, it's going to show me how much Jones has made, or Smith. Or I can even hold down my control key if I want and click on multiple people, and it will show me what all of them have made. But it's only adjusting this one chart. Well, what if I want to modify more than one chart? Well, what I can do is if I right click on my slicers, I can go down to Report Connections. It's going to show me the chart that it's modifying right now, and it just happens to be called Pivot Table 4. It was the 4th one I made. That's my region total. Came off my region total tab. Well, maybe I want to do item count too, which are my total items sold. So I'm going to put a check mark there. Well, and I also want to do my total sales. I really don't want to do my percentage of sales, because if I'm looking at the percentage of Andrews over what he sold over himself, it's always going to be 100%. So that one I don't want to modify. Okay, but I have 3 of them selected. So now when I go up here and say click on Andrews, 3 charts are going to change. I get to see how many items he sold, and I need to put some legends inside of here, so I can see how much amount he sold. So again, I still need to modify and put some data labels on here so you can actually see them. That one has a data label on them. These need to be adjusted. But as I click on any name, I can see 3 charts change. Okay. This is actually fairly cool the way it works. Alright, now I'm going to clear those filters. And again, these charts can always be modified. All I got to do is select them. I have an entire, analyze and design where I can add any elements I want to. I can add data tables, data labels. Again, it doesn't matter. I can just put call outs on them if I want, just so you can see them. So all of these can be modified at any time. I'll just put call outs on all of them just so you can see them. And again, you won't get call outs just on every single one. Okay. So any of these can be modified at any time. Usually you set them up once till you're happy with them, then you don't go back and mess with them anymore. Okay. But so I've turned on all the labels now, so they'll all stay on. But there's one more thing that we can do. I'm going to clear any filter here. This does great for filtering these. Well, we can also do things with macros. Now, we're not getting into writing Visual Basic. These are just clicks. You see how this one doesn't change? Well, it would be pretty nice if we went down here and if we clicked on, say, Howard. While these change, it would be really nice if it went down here and if it highlighted Howard's bar. Change it a different color so we could see what's going on. Okay, so we're going to do that with a very quick little macro, very simple little macro. I'm going to go to my Developer tab and I'm going to click on Record Macro. And I'm just going to do the first person. I'm going to do Andrews. I'm going to save it in this workbook. Okay. Well, the first thing I want is I want these three charts to just show Andrews data. So I'm just going to click on Andrews. Now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to select this chart. Then I'm going to select all of these data sets. Okay, so we see how all of them are selected. Now, there's something I want to do first, and you'll understand it when I make the second one. I'm going to right click them and I'm going to fill them with blue. And then I'm just going to select Andrews. Right click it, and I'm going to fill it with, let's say, red. I'm just going to click away. Now I'm done. So I'm going to stop recording the macro. Now, to make it easier to run the macro, I want a button that I can click on. So I'm going to go to Insert, and the very first icon is a button. I'm going to click on the button. And I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to draw a box. As soon as I let go, it's going to ask me what macro do I want to run when you click on that button. Well, I'm going to say, well, run Andrews, and say OK. Now, of course, we want to put a name here or we won't know, what we're doing. So I'll put Andrews Info. Okay. So when we run that, what should happen is all of these charts should change and this should turn red. Well, it's already there. Okay, so I'm going to record another one. So let's do Gill. Well, the first thing I want to do, and we don't have to, but I'm going to clear the filters to where everything shows back up. And I'm going to go back down here and change this one back to blue. Now, before we go ahead and do Gill, Let's go ahead and run Andrews and see if it works. These three should change, and this one should go red. Now, sometimes, you see how that went red? Sometimes you'll see that happen. Now, Andrews did happen. The filter did turn on. This is Andrews, this is Andrews, and this is Andrews. Where it messed up at, and it will do it sometimes, is, let me go to my Analyze here. This is chart 1. This, you see it? You see the name of the chart? Is also called chart 1. See that one? Chart 1. Chart 1. See, that's a problem. Because what the macro is looking at is the name of the chart. It doesn't know which one to change. And this is the first one that it got to. When they're on their separate worksheets, they're known as chart 1, chart 2, chart 3, chart 4. When you put them all together, they're typically just known as chart 1. So what we can do is I can rename them. Where this one's called chart 1, I can actually call it, let's call it total sales. Then I can go over here and I can call that region total. Then now I'm going to keep that one chart 1 because that's what the macro actually thinks it's named. And I'll call this total sold. Alright. So now these three charts are now called something different. Now let me go ahead and reset this color back just so you can see it work. Let me fill it back with the blue. And let me turn off all the filters. Now I'm going to run Andrews info. Okay. You see that one turned red? And again, I'll show you why. Again, you don't have to know Visual Basic for this. But if I go into the macros, there's the macro I recorded. If I edit that macro, I see the code. You see down here it says chart object chart 1, and that's where it changed the color to red. The problem was when I ran the macro, all 4 of these charts were called chart 1, so it didn't know which one to turn red. You will run across that if you put multiple charts on the same worksheet. It's a very simple fix. Just rename the chart to something else. Okay, we're going to record one more. Again, I'm going to make sure everything is clear, and I'm going to turn this back to blue. And I'm going to record another macro. I'm going to make sure nothing's selected. I'm going to record another macro, and I'm going to call this GIL. I'm going to turn on the GIL filter. I'm going to come down here, select all of them. Okay, so I have all of these selected. I'm going to right click them, fill them with blue. And then I'm just going to select GIL. That's the only one selected. Right click it, fill it with red. Click away and stop the recording. Now I want to make a button for it. Insert, button. I'll make me a button over here. And I'll say GIL. Now, of course, I want to select my text and call it gill info. Oops, didn't mean to hit enter. There we go. So now I've got two buttons. Well, let's run Andrew's info. Charts changed to Andrew's data, and Andrew's turns red. Let's try Gill's. All the data changes to Gill's, and the chart turns red. Now it should make sense as to why when I recorded the macro, the first thing I did, I selected all of these points. Not just one, but I selected every one of them and turned them all to blue. And then I changed the one I wanted to red. I did that because if I wouldn't have turned them all blue first, if we would have ran Andrews, of course this one would be red. And if we would have gone back and ran Gill's, if I wouldn't have turned them all to blue first, it would have turned Gill's red, but Andrew's still would have been red. So the trick is kind of thinking through your macros before you record them, because unless you know Visual Basic, you can't edit them. I can't add in a click, or I can't change anything without going into the Visual Basic editor. So now I really don't even need these slicers anymore. I can just pretty much get rid of that. I mean, I could keep them on until I get all my buttons done, but after I get all my buttons done, I can just cut those, get those out of the way, and I can just have a line of buttons over here where we can click on Andrew's info. Actually, I need to have them at least hidden. I didn't mean to really get rid of them, didn't mean to delete them. Let me in fact turn them back on, because what it wants to do, it wants to run the filter. I didn't mean to delete them, I just meant to hide them. There we go. Let me just make sure they're here. And all my connections should still be there except for percentage of sales. And they'll run just fine. I could always collapse these or whatever, but it does still have to stay here because this points to these. But I can make a whole set of buttons and control an entire worksheet with just a click of a button. Okay, so that's just a real quick thing on making a pivot table, making a pivot chart, taking that pivot chart and moving it to a new sheet, and then recording a very simple little macro just to change the color of a bar. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will be posting some other ones. I have had some people ask me for a little bit more detailed information on, say, just pivot tables, so I can create some much longer videos on just creating pivot tables without going over so much stuff at once. So stay on the lookout for those. But until next time, if you like the videos, please give it a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel. I will be posting more of them. And let me know if there's anything in particular that you're looking for. But until then, have a good night, and I'll talk to you soon.